You'll recall this image as the HDR image we created in an earlier video. Now here the shadows and the highlights are far more manageable, but we're going to still have to use our global and strategic editing to get the best from this high dynamic range version. Now the first thing I would look at with an image is the crop and straighten. Looking at this, maybe I can just straighten it a little bit. Does it just need a little tweak? It's certainly very minimal. I'll hit the enter key. I don't think I need to do too much else here. The next option is color balance. Now I'm going to pick up the eyedropper tool because I think we've got the perfect spot to touch here, because we do know the white lines on the road should be white. So when I click them, the changes that are made are pretty much perfect, I think, for what I saw on that particular evening. Now I'd like to see if I can enhance the contrast even a little more. Maybe I'll go down to the clarity here and step that well up, because this is mid-tone contrast. And as you can see, it does give a little bit more sparkle into the greens. Looking around the image, there's nothing much more I think I'd be prepared to do at this stage. Maybe if there was a lot of texture in the foreground, I might increase that. But here I don't think it's needed. Maybe I'll see if I can get a little bit more vibrance into the shot. But I'm not sure there's too much more I want to do from a global editing point of view. I think the next point is to look at the sky. You can see the sky's got a bit of a weakness on the left hand side. That's obvious because that's where the sun's going down. So here I'm going to turn to strategic editing. I'm going to go to my masks. I'm going to select the sky. Now whenever I select the entire sky, I find that generally speaking there's a limit to how far I can move the sliders, because most of the time when we're darkening skies, it looks much better when the top is darker than the horizon. Otherwise we can get a shot which looks unnatural. Now I'll untick that overlay so we can see the effect. Let's take a look at what the highlights are going to do. That's doing a little bit of exposure, maybe even a bit of black and whites. And the reason I move to them is because if I split the black and the whites, I am increasing contrast a bit. So maybe I can drop that down and this up a little bit, keeping an eye on the histogram on the right hand side, but I've got a HDR here, so I've got a lot of latitude. But wherever I choose, there we have it. Now I can probably take stock of that top left corner. How would I deal with that? Well, I think possibly if we put a linear gradient on the left hand side, I can always remove from the gradient any areas that I don't want affected. Let me demonstrate that by going to the masks again. Let's select the linear gradient. I'm going to click and drag because I want it to affect somewhere up to about there. Once again, I'll just take off that overlay so we can get it out of our eye line. But I would like the sky on the left to be a little more blue. But I'm not sure that's going to be a good idea here because it's going to affect the foreground and the middle distance. So let me just try a little bit of exposure. Maybe I'll just tweak the temperature down a little bit so I get a little more at the top left and a little more. And it's actually darkening the clouds and the highlights, so that's working in my favour, but it's darkening this area here a bit too much. So let's go to subtract from our linear gradient. I'm going to use a brush to do that. The flow is somewhere around about 20. I'll adjust the brush and I'll just wipe across this area and just bring those tones back to what I liked in the first place. So I've got what I want done to the top corner, but I haven't had to compromise the bottom left corner. Having looked at that sky at the top left, I'd still like to see if I could do something else. So here's an idea. I'm going to hit the G key, which is the shortcut key, to apply a new linear gradient. And I'm going to click and drag that sort of area. Coming over to the right hand side here, I'm going to go down to this color option and we get a little white square. Let's click that, put my cursor up into the blues and pick a really nice blue. That's a little bit too vivid, so let's take down the saturation. So here I may be able to affect that top left corner just a little bit better by putting in a little bit of color from what you saw there from this particular option. It's not massive. Let's click it again. I can always change my mind and go in and change it. And not forgetting, when we're working with these gradients, if I touch the V key, I can adjust this even though I've applied all the changes that I felt I needed. So even now I can twist and turn this, and if I find I get a better result, I can live with that. Let's click back to the basic tab, because there are times when it's a good idea to just step back and take a look at the image. So what I think I'll do next is to open this image up into Photoshop. Now, in a previous video we were talking about smart objects, and we can see that I still have them turned on. So this image has arrived on screen as a smart object. Now what that means is I can double click and I can take this image back into Adobe Camera Raw at any time. And I can make other changes if I suddenly see there's a need. On this occasion I don't, so I'll cancel and come back. But while we're working on a smart object, there are some things we can't do. I was going to suggest that we have a look at trying to do something with that skid mark there, maybe even that one there. Well, I can't do that while I've got a smart object. I can select the tool, and we appear to have the brush. I'll make it a bit bigger and I'll just start to paint, and there you can see the smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Now we can get around this by putting a new blank layer above that smart object, and as long as we've got the sample all layers box ticked, then I could then use the tool pretty well. But to be honest, you could argue, what's the point? Because if I started to clone or heal onto this layer here, and then I double clicked this one and took it back into Camera Raw to make a change, then there's a good chance that these repairs would then show up. So I think it's reasonable to believe that at this stage we probably would rasterize this layer. Right click, and you'll find it here somewhere. There it is. But I'll still put the new blank layer over the top because we're not sure if this is going to work very well. Let me bring my brush down, and I would be doing a little bit of work like this, and to see if I can actually fix this completely. Now it's going to take a little while, and I don't think you need to watch every single thing I'm doing because it's very much the same. You can see I've got a brush that covers the area, and that's all it requires. Sometimes it may require another touch here and there, but again, a lot of personal choice there too. Now here we're looking at the new blank layer that contains all the repairs I've decided to do. Never looks very elegant when we see that new blank layer isolated like this, but when we see it with the image turned on, then we can turn this on and off, and we can see how successful or not we've been with those changes. Now you can see I never took absolutely every one of those skid marks out, but I took the prominent ones. I'm not too worried about the ones on the right hand side. But as I turn on and off, you may see lots of little highlights in the background. Now they're not significant, and you could always argue that was there a need to do that? Well, I generally do for two reasons. One, I do know how damaging even small highlights can be, and I also know how easy they are to touch out using that healing brush on the left hand side in the toolbox. And of course here we've done everything in a foolproof, fail-safe manner. We do not have to commit the repairs until we're ready, and when we are ready we can go to the top right of the layers and we can flatten the image to save it. Now it's time to bring this video to a close, but I cannot do that until I show you one more little tip which I often use with landscapes and seascapes. The image is more or less 3:2 aspect ratio. I'd like to stretch it just a little bit. I'm going to go to my image menu, image size. Normally the width and the height would be linked by this chain link. Remove that, and here I'm going to increase 8192 to 8700. So I've added about 500 pixels on, but not the height. Watch the image, we just get a nice elongation of the image which doesn't impact it in a negative way at all. So I think with that I'll see you next time.